The Third Circuit upholds the prohibition on nonviolent felons owning guns, plus a conversation with Tzvi Waldman of the New York State Jewish Gun Club on his group's suit against the state's synagogue gun ban. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload podcast.
I gave him poison just for fun. I had one friend.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also the founder of the Reload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free weekly newsletter right now if you want to keep up to date with the latest news on guns in America. You can also buy a membership if you want to support the work that we do and get exclusive access to hundreds of pieces of analysis and stories that you will not find anywhere else. You'll also get this podcast a day early and the opportunity to appear on the show. And we're actually going to have a members segment coming up in the next episode or two, one of my favorite segments. So I'm looking forward to that. But this week we are discussing New York's latest gun carry law and one of the major challenges to it, which is why we have Tzvi Waldman from the New York State Jewish Gun Club on with us. Did I get the name of the group right? I apologize.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, good. And I got your name right.
Yeah,
correct?
Perfect. That's good.
I'm happy because I think the last couple episodes I've been messing people's names up off the bat. So I got it right this time. But thank you for coming on the show. Can you just tell people a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Tzvi Waldman. I'm the founder of the New York State Jewish Gun Club. So the club started probably around 5 years ago when I moved out of New York City into Rockland County. And I started getting into guns. And I realized that there's not much of a community. And I know the power of what a community can do. So when I went to the range, I met some other people in my community. I started writing down people's names. And when we had enough people, we started arranging classes and training together. And it just grew into a club. Now, we're not a traditional club that we have a range and stuff like that. We're more of a support group. And we have many different initiatives in the club.
Nice. And one of the things you guys are doing right now is supporting a lawsuit against the state's new gun carry restrictions, specifically the restriction on carrying a gun into a place of worship. Even if you obtain the permit that they require, you still can't carry in a church or a synagogue or any other place of worship. And so can you give us a little bit of background on how that suit is going? What's the status of that suit right now?
So with that suit, we started, so as soon as the CCI laws came out, there's tons of stuff that we can challenge. And we didn't even know where to start. It's like a big elephant. So we realized we got to do one bite at a time. So we sat down trying to figure out what's the most important thing for us. And we realized that one of the main reasons why people carry guns and they train and they, is to be able to protect the synagogues. The average Orthodox Jew spends probably 20 hours a week in synagogue. So it's almost like a part-time job. And for us to be able to be there and not to be armed is ridiculous. So I reached out to my members. We found a plaintiff in New York City, someone that had a license to carry in the synagogue. It was a premise permit registered to the synagogue itself. He's the president of that synagogue.
Right, because this is actually a change from the previous law. Even the law that was declared unconstitutional for being too restrictive actually did allow people who had permits to carry in synagogues before. But now that's actually, this law is more restrictive than that one, correct?
Right. So he got a letter from the NYPD telling him that since he has a premise permit and that if the premise where he's going to carry his gun is one of these restricted or prohibited places, he needs to either find a different place to keep it or hand in his license. So, yeah, and then the other plaintiff is in Rockland County. He has been carrying to synagogue and carrying, all around for the past 10 years. And all of a sudden now he is limited. So we, our lawyers filed for a TRO that got denied. Then we went to the preliminary injunction. We had our preliminary injunction hearing. I think that was 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we are still waiting for the judge to give a ruling on the preliminary injunction.
So you're still basically just waiting for news from the judge. Now you guys sent a letter to the judge just recently, urging him to act in one direction or the other. What was the motivation for that?
So it's a sense of urgency. Like this, besides the ban of carrying in house of worship, the law states and religious observation. Now, as an Orthodox Jew, we do things throughout the day that is considered religious observation. A simple example, my kippah, right? I wear it because this is my tradition, it's my culture, and it's part of my religious observance. So I'm home. If I have my firearm on me, am I a felon? I don't know. It could be interpreted that way. We can take, in this tons of things throughout the day, like if somebody stops on the side of the road, like we have certain prayers in the day that we need to say before sundown, right? So somebody drives on the highway, he stops at a gas station, or even the side of the road, and he says the prayer, right? It's religious observation. There is tons of things that we do throughout the day because we live a religious life. So that is very, very concerning, having these vague laws on the book. I mean, people can say, wow, you really think a cop is going to arrest you for it? Okay, right now not. What happens, a different DA comes in, or a different police chief, and gives different directives. And the scary part is, if you look in Germany in 1930, these type of laws were put into place, and people said, nah, it's for safety, don't worry, they're never going to use it. And at the end of the day, the different political parties, when they were fighting it out for control, they used these laws to oppress the other party to gain power over them. And then ended up being in a situation that Jews and other people in the population were oppressed and marched into the gas chambers. And it was too late to do something. So these are the type of laws that we have to take a hard stand and fight it. It's not only the Second Amendment, it's even a bigger First Amendment violation, because if I wouldn't be religious, this wouldn't matter to me as much.
Right. Now, obviously, presumably you don't view New York State as the officials there as similar to the Nazis, but you're concerned about the power that this law gives. Is that an accurate view?
Correct. It's a gross violation of the 14th Amendment. This law is vague. Even at the preliminary injunction hearing, the state couldn't define what this law is themselves, and it's obviously vague, and it's scary to have these vague laws because we cannot be in a situation where it could potentially be used against people.
Right, because of that historical, because of that history of disarmament, in previous generations.
Correct. It's also a trend throughout the world, and not only in Germany. Other countries have similar trends.
Right. But so this letter that you sent also mentioned, it's a specific threat that was the FBI had been warning about at the time as example of the kinds of unique challenges that the Jewish population faces, right?
Correct. Yeah. So basically what happened was there's a different case, I think, in the Western District with a very similar case for a pastor and a reverend. I think it's the Western District. I think it's the Hardaway case.
Yes.
I'm not sure exact. Yeah.
Right.
So they got their preliminary injunction granted, and at the same time, I think the same day, the FBI in Newark, their Newark office gave out a bulletin to a specific threat to synagogues. Now, I live in Muncie, New York. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago on Hanukkah, there was a machete attack in a rabbi's house while they were celebrating the Hanukkah, and that individual came from Newark. From New Jersey, crossed over into Muncie, and our local police department gave out a bulletin on Twitter and Facebook as well that we should all heighten our security posture. So that put us even further in a bind, and my phone kept on ringing. Said, "Tzvi, what should we do? Can we carry? Shouldn't we?" So our lawyers decided to do what they have to do. I mean, they represent us, and they couldn't give us an answer in what we should do. So they just sent a letter to the judge demanding him, whatever, asking him to give an answer.
Right. But he hasn't actually acted since you guys sent that letter.
Not yet. It's very frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because didn't the NYPD issued a warning to the entire Jewish population in New York about these security threats and how they need to, be reticent about the threats and be able to potentially defend themselves. But at the same time, it's a crime to carry, even if you're licensed, even if you've gone through the process of showing that you're a law-abiding citizen. It's still a crime to carry in a place of worship, which is obviously a specific target for anti-Semitic violence. Correct?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not. Obviously, I'm not Jewish, but I read the news, and it's
100%.
It's pretty clear where these threats are directed.
And not only that, this law also, if you are an individual and you're even an armed guard, meaning you got the New York State license and the training and the certificate to be an armed guard, you are not allowed to be hired by the synagogue independently. So They have to do it through a company. Now, if you do it through a company, the costs go up for the synagogue, right? So a lot of people in my community, the synagogue wanted a structured system. They didn't want just people to randomly carry. They wanted to have some type of training. So they said, okay, if you want to train, let's get 5-6 people. We'll put you through the armed guard program, and you'll get the licenses. And then the synagogue will hire you independently for like very, very cheap. Some even volunteer, but there's some type of structure in this, and they can get insurance. They were able to get insurance through their policy from the house of worship, from the building, and it worked out. But under this new law, they can't even hire independent security contractors, meaning independently. You can hire a company, but it can cost $1,500 just for the Shabbat, just for the weekend services. And not all synagogues are able to afford, because on the Sabbath, we're not allowed to drive or use any electronics. So we have like these little synagogues all around the neighborhood with like 20, 30 people that are with walking distances of people's houses. And these synagogues usually run on a shoestring budget. So it's not even so they didn't even have the ability to hire like a full-fledged security company, to send them people. In terms of a threat to the community, yes, I mean, antisemitism is on the rise. On top of them, like, crime is on the rise. Mm-hmm. And, all the noise from social media, from the celebrities that are busy bashing, it doesn't help. It just convolutes and confuses the situation. And also like the cancel culture, like the minute somebody comes out and says something against everybody, everybody gets all wild up and they get canceled. It doesn't help the situation either. It just makes more noise. It just, motivates more people to do stuff on both sides. It's not good. So yeah, and on top of that, we're in a situation where the Supreme Court gave a very clear ruling, and like New York State, out of spite, decided to go against it.
And you mentioned this earlier, and it's a big part of the letter that you sent the judge. But can you talk a little more about this intersection of the First Amendment and Second Amendment in this case? Why do you view the First Amendment as being implicated here? You just explain a little bit more that rationale.
It's, if you want to ban the house of worship, okay, but religious observation, what is that all about? Like when I was talking to the lawyers, I was like, nah, it must be a mistake. Like, they weren't thinking. And they were telling me, look, this law was put out within 12 hours of the Bruen decision, meaning they had this law ready to go. Obviously, it was worked on for a while. If they wouldn't have a specific reason for it, it wouldn't be there. Understand? And when I spoke to legislators who were there, who voted against it, and they asked me, like, how could such a thing pass? Like, this is, it's so blatantly unconstitutional on so many levels. And they were like, look, this is what happens when you have a supermajority and every single part of the process is controlled by them. So they have the ability to shove these type of laws down your throat. And again, they use emergency orders. I mean, some type of emergency, like whatever, to bypass the regular 3-day waiting period, so people can examine the law and make sure it makes sense and it's sensible. So again, the First Amendment portion of this, it is disturbing because, like a simple thing, like a shiva house, right? When somebody passes away, for 6 days you sit in your house and people come to visit and talk. It's a religious thing, Is that we're doing it because we are religious observant? Is that religious observation? So no one in the house now can have firearms? I can think of so many different things. I mean, we have 613 mitzvahs, right, from the Bible. Some of them is what we have to do and some things that we don't have to do. And throughout the entire day, almost every couple of minutes, we do something either a certain way or we don't do something because we can't do it. So we live a religious life. So do you view the law then as making you choose between your First Amendment right to practice these religious observances and your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms? Correct. I know a lot of people called me up with genuine concerns about this. Can I carry here? Can I carry there? Like all different situations. Like I have an office building and when I'm the owner, so I put up a sign, so I'm allowed to, right? But then we have a minyan of mincha. Like we have this every day at 12 o'clock at noon. People from the office building come together and we pray. What do I do then? Do I take it off? Do I leave it at my desk? And like all these like weird situations that people find themselves in, it's concerning to people. And some people tell me like ever since then, like I don't carry my gun because I don't know. I'm scared, I'm nervous, and I have a feeling part of the shtick that the state did is to create a confusing environment so people will rather leave their guns home than have it on them. And for a community that is being targeted and there's specific threats against them, it's very disturbing. Yeah.
I can't imagine, especially with the atmosphere, as you mentioned right now, with a lot of celebrities making anti-Semitic remarks or or pushing anti-Semitic viewpoints. I imagine the tension, the threat level is higher now than it has been in previous years. And but I want to talk briefly here about some of the other cases, right? There are 3 cases against this provision of this law that are active right now in New York in the federal system. You mentioned the case in the Western District, your case is in the Southern District. There's also a case in the Northern District that's more broadly going after the entire law that just actually had their own preliminary injunction issued that blocked most of the provisions, but it also did block the places of worship restrictions, or at least it blocked them, saying that you can't impose that without exceptions, allowing certain people to carry guns if the place of worship approves of them. And so I guess one of the big questions I think people will have is you've got 2 cases now outside of your case in the same state about the same law that have found this provision to be unconstitutional. Why is it still in force in New York City where you and nearby where you guys are?
So at the preliminary injunction hearing, the state basically stated that they do not look at the ruling from the Northern District, the Antioch case, or the other case, as applicable to the Southern District. They came up with some cockamamie reason. The judges were like scratching their head like this. It's never heard of such a thing, but this is what they claim.
Yeah, so the state still claims they can enforce this law, even though it's been enjoined in 2 other
Correct.
federal courts.
Again, it was enjoined at times. I think now the Second Circuit, and that's also confusing. We're still trying to figure out what it means.
Yeah, the Second Circuit just issued a stay on the Northern District ruling. So that's now those all the provisions from the Concealed Carry Improvement Act, as they called it in New York, are going to be in effect. Except I think the Western District ruling is still that the block on enforcing the places of worship restriction in the Western District of New York is still in place. I don't believe that's been stayed yet. So we'll have to. It does definitely create a very confusing situation, I think, if you're a New Yorker looking at all these suits and you're getting rulings against these provisions, but they only are in place in certain areas of the state, and only in the case of the Northern District lawsuit, only for a couple of days was it blocked, and now it's back in force. And in the Southern District, it's never been blocked. The judge is sort of perhaps dragging his feet a bit on your case. So yeah, I mean, is that a pretty accurate description of what's going on there? I mean, I think for people in New York and the rest of the country, it's fairly confusing.
Yep, I think the state achieved what they wanted to achieve: create confusion, so people will rather leave their guns at home than carry it. This is the reason for all this theater. This is to create this type of environment. And even with, let's say, even when they rolled out the initial CCIA, they said, okay, there's going to be a new process with a new application. They did not give any guidance to any of the counties in like what application is going to be, like any detailed plan of SOPs, nothing. So a lot of the counties just didn't know what to do and just stopped issuing permits till they get clarification. And their legal departments were just busy scratching their head trying to figure out what to do. So I believe that from speaking to people at different levels of government and seeing how this went down, I think one way we can stop such a laws in the future is to create some type of law or something where if government is going to implement a law, obviously this is the 14th Amendment, it can be vague, but it needs to be sensible. And if you do pass laws that are not sensible and you don't wait the proper 3-day periods, there should be, the people responsible for it should be personally reliable for these type of things. It just creates chaos and no one knows what to do. And everybody's in limbo trying to figure out. And meanwhile, people that genuinely want to carry for genuine reasons, they can't. And again, people, I think also like people have to understand, Second Amendment is not a second-class right. It's just as important as the First and every other thing. I mean, when it comes to large First Amendment cases, everybody wakes up. Everybody is, everybody lights up about it. There's all these First Amendment organizations that are busy fighting these cases day and night. And I think the Second Amendment it's going to be that way. It'll just take time for the states and the anti-gun to realize that the Second Amendment is just like the First Amendment.
So where do you guys go from here? What's your strategy moving forward? If you don't get a favorable ruling from this judge at the district level, which honestly seems like you're not going to, he denied your TRO, and now he's sort of slow walking the preliminary injunction phase of this. But if he rules against you, what's your next step?
Appeal it. Take it to the next level. I mean,
and how far are you willing to go with it?
All the way, as far as we need to.
All the way up to the Supreme Court.
If that's what it takes, yeah.
That makes sense. And so, I just want to talk a little bit as well about your group. We've had a number of groups on the podcast in the past that represent, different minority groups in the United States who are gun owners. We've had, the National African American Gun Association, the Asian American Pacific Islander gun owners, and all sorts of different viewpoints. It seems like gun ownership in America has become more diversified over the past couple of decades, and especially over the past couple of years. Is that something that you've noticed as well with your group?
Definitely. It is an upwards trend for many reasons. The pandemic, there was a spike all over the country, and obviously in the Jewish community as well. And then the violence, the antisemitism. At least my personal journey, to gun ownership. Obviously, I always had an interest in self-defense. But when I think it was the Pittsburgh shooting happened, that was a big wake-up call. And that's when I started organizing training. And I started getting involved with some Second Amendment organizations to try to do litigation and helping them out. And then we had the Muncie attack that, within my town. That was another huge wake-up call. And I think a week later, we had the terrible shootout, what happened in, I think it's Jersey City, with a kosher supermarket.
Yeah.
That was horrific. And then we had a Poway shooting in California. And then just a string of others, And then, again, at the same time, we also had shootings in churches, Texas, there's, tons of them. So it is an upward trend, but the Jewish community is more reserved when it comes to gun ownership. They're very afraid of how it will be perceived. They don't want to come across as aggressive people, have an aggressive posture. It's more like a passive. We'll do what we have to do to protect ourselves. It's not in your face, Our families are larger families. I think the average of Orthodox household, I think is six children, something like that. So a lot of people are concerned with guns and children around the house. Sure. A lot of people don't even want their kids to know about it because they don't want them to go to school and because they don't know how other people feel about it. There's a different aspect in the community why guns is a little bit quieter is because the fact is that a lot of our grandparents went through the Holocaust, and the gun was the thing that, chased them into the cattle carts and into the gas chambers. So we never wanted to bring up guns around our grandparents. I remember having this conversation with my grandmother, and I asked her straight up, why don't we have guns now to protect ourselves? And I saw it in her face. I couldn't ask that question anymore. I saw the reaction it evoked. So we are sensitive to it, and we understand that there's a certain trauma that they went through that the guns caused it.
So how do you change that perception of guns in the Jewish community? How have you gone about, alleviating those sort of concerns that you're discussing there?
So I think people understanding the founding of America and the founding of the Constitution and the reasons for it, and seeing a trend how governments that do not have these type of checks and built in the system and this inherent right, how it could lead to oppression. And I think we're the second, third generation Americans that people start understanding it and people start seeing it. And there's a big shift in mindset. But again, when we do it, we have to respect it and we have to understand it. So we're less in your face. We're very discreet about it. I know so many people that when I meet them in public, I don't even blink. They don't want to even acknowledge that they know me because they don't want people to know that they know me. Oh, so probably, So I have to understand that, and I have to respect that, you know. But yeah, it's a lot more people carry, a lot more people have guns in the community than people think, because again, there's another aspect as well. We live in New York, in New York State, and we don't know what our neighbors think about it, and we don't want to offend people. You know, we just want to get along. So a lot of people just don't want to talk about it to their coworkers and the work, you know. So people are quiet about it, and I guess the downside of it is that if people are not vocal about it, then the public opinion, the public perception might look differently than what in reality it is. So when it comes to these type of challenges, when you do lawsuits and you need people to speak about it, you need that momentum. It's not always easy to get within this community because a lot of people are very, very quiet and they don't want to be vocal about it.
And as far as the gun owning community goes, especially working with other gun rights groups or things like that, how have you found that relationship to be? Have people been embracing you guys? Or are you not as well connected as you'd like to be? Like, how's the experience been when interacting with gun owners from other backgrounds or from other organizations in particular?
So there's certain organizations that has been great, and certain lawsuits that are out there. I was involved behind the scenes because I was very vocal about it in the beginning. I got a lot of emails from potential plaintiffs, and once we decided which district we're going to sue, I was able to help other organizations with our plaintiffs. So there's a lot of good organizations out there. I got support from others, and I'm still working connections. Whatever, meeting, and my emails are blowing up every day with different people that could connect me and want to connect me, and I just need more hours in the day.
But it's been a positive experience so far, as far as the way that other gun rights groups have
yes, very surprisingly. I was very reserved. Like, till 3 years ago, I did not utter a word about the gun club to the media and public. I had people reach out to me, people that saw it on Instagram, media. I didn't give any interviews. When I did give interviews, I did not mention the gun club. I didn't mention anything about it. But when it came after the Bruin decision and the reaction, and I was so upset about it, and I realized I had no choice. I had to go public about it. And once I went public, when I saw the reaction and how it's embraced, it just motivated me to continue the work.
And so what's your overall vision for the gun club moving forward? How to, like, both on the legal side and on the cultural side, what are your goals?
So I want to continue the advocacy work, create educational programs to educate people about the Second Amendment, organize training within the community and other communities as well, and just be a force of positive. I mean, it's, I'm getting people are reaching out to me from other communities like I would never think of, like the amount of emails I got from people in Manhattan that are concerned. And you would think of Manhattan as like, the epicenter of liberalism. You'll be surprised how many people feel differently. So I realize there's a need and people are responding positively to it. So it's just motivating me to keep on moving forward.
That's fantastic. So if people want to learn more about the club or help you with this lawsuit, what are the best ways to get in contact with you or read about what you're doing or so forth? So
the website is nysjewishgunclub.com. And if people want to donate, nysjewishgunclub.com/donate, or there's a red donation button on the top right side of the website where they can help out. And we have a 501c3 that we created and we attached to it, United Jewish Gun Coalition. It's tax deductible, so people can donate over there.
Wonderful. Well, we really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your perspective and giving us an update on what's going on with that lawsuit. And we'll hope to have you back on again in the future and absolutely keep our readers informed about how your lawsuit is progressing.
Thanks for having me.
All right, it's time for the news update with contributing writer Jake Fogelman. Jake, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. It's officially wintertime here in Colorado. The temperatures are in the single digits this morning, so staying warm.
Nice. Yeah, it finally got cold out here in Virginia too, which I prefer. I like to have actual seasons in my year. I used to get more of those up in Pennsylvania than you do down here in Virginia, but at least November is actually cold now. It was pretty freaking warm the early part of the month here, but maybe we'll get some snow soon. Have you guys started getting snow?
Yeah, actually, just last night we got I'm here in Denver, and we got about 3 inches overnight. So nice. I think it's the first big snowstorm of the season. So
great,
winter is here.
You'll have to hit up the slopes at some point.
Yeah.
Do you ski or snowboard? Or?
Not really. For a Colorado kid, I'm actually not a big skier or snowboarder. I played ice hockey growing up, so most of my time was on the rinks instead of the slopes. Nice.
I like to snowboard, so hopefully I'll get to go this. I haven't been probably in 2 years, but I got to get some new boots too. But either way, I do like the cold. But this week we are talking about a new ruling out of the Third Circuit. This is actually the first significant appeals court ruling on a gun law after the Bruin decision from the Supreme Court. I think it's the first decision from an appeals court on gun policy at all. I can't recall anyone else making, other than some remands of other cases back down to lower courts. I don't think there's been a decision on the merits yet using the Bruin standard. But now we have one from the Third Circuit, which upheld the lifetime ban on nonviolent felons owning firearms, really all felons, but the case was specifically about a non-violent felon. He's a man who basically defrauded the government for about $2,500 for food stamps in 1995 and has been banned from owning guns ever since. He challenged that ban under the Bruin decision under Second Amendment protections. He claimed that it violates the Second Amendment. And the Third Circuit ruled that it does not, or at least a panel of the Third Circuit ruled that the law is constitutional. They did a historical analysis. And can you tell us just a little bit about what their reasoning was?
Sure, yeah. So like you said, first, we've seen this a couple district court cases so far on this very question. But first appeals court decision to actually analyze the rationale behind the lifetime felon ban. And so their rationale was essentially they relied a lot on a lot of the Supreme Court dicta in both Heller and Bruin, where the justices just over and over said the Second Amendment protects law-abiding, responsible citizens, something to that nature, just multiple times throughout the decision. So essentially their rationale was a person who commits a felony, or in this case, a felony equivalent offense, because that welfare fraud offense in Pennsylvania was classified as a misdemeanor under their law,
right?
But it was punishable by 5 years in prison. And under the Federal Gun Control Act, they define a felony as anything punishable by more than a year in prison. So even though it was a misdemeanor for which he never served any jail time, he's classified as a felon as far as the federal law is concerned. So
yeah, and so he challenged this, and they basically led their entire opinion with not the required historical tests,
right,
of whether the law from 1968. I mean, the prohibited persons stuff dates back to the 1930s. The gun control, federal gun control from the bill from the 1930s, but that portion dates to the 1960s. So it's obviously a modern law there.
Sure.
And Bruin requires looking at whether or not there's a substantially similar historical counterpart to that law from the founding era. And instead of diving into that right away, as you mentioned, they just quoted back the Supreme Court's words to the effect that Second Amendment protections only extend to the law-abiding. Of course, the Supreme Court never got into what that actually means, but yeah, the Third Circuit has taken it to mean Interestingly, they have a footnote that says, it doesn't apply to lesser crimes, but felonies, all felonies, they think that makes you not law abiding. And so, but it's interesting that they led with that, but they went further from there, right?
Right. Yeah. So basically they said, if you're not law abiding, you're not classified as the people that the Second Amendment refers to, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. So you can be construed as not a part of the people that the Second Amendment ostensibly protects. So therefore, as a felon, the Second Amendment does not protect your right to continue owning guns. But as you said, they didn't do an extensive historical analysis as the Bruin test would require, but they did kind of lay out the history of various legislatures in the colonial era and even back in England prohibiting people from owning guns for various reasons. Usually, I think the word they used was upsetting social cohesion or the social compact. And it was what we've seen in a couple other court cases where they laid out essentially just historical bigoted bans on classes of people. So, for example, Catholics in England or Blacks and Native Americans in the colonial era here in America. So kind of some ugly history to make the justification that, look, state governments had discretion in the past to take arms away from people. So that's our historical examples.
Right. Well, so they led with this appeal to the dicta. Dicta is basically any part of a Supreme Court ruling that isn't part of the merits of the case, right? Isn't part of the actual decision, but is included in the ruling. They led with that stuff. And then they went into their version of a historical analysis, which led with these explicitly bigoted historical gun laws, things like total bans on Native Americans owning guns, or Catholics. And the Catholics one doesn't even extend to actual American history. That's from 16th and 17th century England, which those laws didn't actually make it into the American tradition, but they claim that was the Supreme Court allows you to look at some of these laws further back as a way of informing what was in place during the founding era. And it's pretty gross to me that that was their main thrust for justifying the felon in possession bans. I mean, if that's what the entire law is relying on, boy, I would hope not. Right. I would hope that they could find some other reasons, and some other courts have. This idea that certain groups of people are outside, certain groups of individuals are outside of the protections of the people is not a new concept. This ruling really kind of felt a bit scattershot. They just kind of threw everything at the wall, and we're hoping it succeeds. Later on, they get into bans on gun ownership for loyalists who hadn't declared an oath of loyalty to the United States during the early founding era, and so those were actually at least American gun laws. But of course, you could remedy those by just taking an oath of loyalty. So it's a little different than the lifetime ban discussed here. But they threw that in. They threw in this argument that, well, felons in the founding era, a common punishment was the death penalty for all felonies. Of course, felonies were very different at the time. Some of them were the same, your high level violent crimes, murder and rape and so forth were felonies then, but there are way more felonies now, right? In our modern time, including this stealing $2,500 from, or committing like $2,500 of food stamp fraud is a felony now. But they argued that because death penalty was common punishment for felonies during the founding era, that, well, of course, that implies that disarming the person would be an acceptable, in the acceptable range of punishments as well. And so they kind of took this throw everything at the wall approach to the ruling, but it's really pretty gross that they led with the racist stuff, the explicitly racist stuff. Because essentially their argument is, as you noted, the founding era, they believed that certain groups of individuals were outside the protections of the people if they were perceived to be dangerous to society. But of course they're citing laws where the reason these people were deemed to be dangerous to society is because they were the wrong race or the wrong religion.
Right.
And so having that as your foundational historical analog for disarming people today is terrible.
I say it's more than a little gross.
Yeah. So, and I don't think it makes any sense either when you read, at least as far as appealing to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court has done the exact opposite with historical gun laws that are based in racism. They use them as examples of how the right was viewed to be very expansive, the right to keep and bear arms, and that these laws were proof that that those rights were being denied to certain groups of people. It didn't use those laws as a basis for what you could what restrictions you could put in place today.
Right.
In the sense that they're saying, well, blacks were viewed as dangerous by slave owners because they didn't like being enslaved. So you can disarm any group that society views as dangerous, whether or not they've committed any crimes at all. I mean, that's the other thing about it is like they're using this to justify, well, people who've committed crimes, even nonviolent crimes, can be disarmed for life. Although they do hand wave at there's supposed to be procedures for you to be able to regain your gun rights over time, but in practice, effectively those are never used.
Yeah, I say it's very rare.
But
they also make a weird carve out in this rationale explicitly for the Second Amendment, because there's a portion of the decision. This is interesting. There's a portion of the decision where they address the fact that, well, if you're a felon, you don't suddenly lose your First Amendment rights for life. You can still speak freely. You're not, allowed to, the government's not allowed to unreasonably search and seize your property just because you're a felon. But they explicitly said, well, our analysis is just for the Second Amendment, and it is not meant to construe an implication for any other right. And that's that. They just put that in a footnote, which is interesting.
I think that's especially interesting when it comes to Supreme Court review, because it implies, the whole thing about Bruin and what Justice Thomas has railed about repeatedly over the last dozen years since Heller is that the Second Amendment is being treated as a second-class right by a lot of lower courts. And so here you have this ruling where they're just explicitly saying it provides less protections than other amendments of the Constitution. And so, that does seem like something that's almost you spit in the eye kind of thing.
Right.
They're like, there's some nuance there, I think, in how felonies affect your rights long term. Like the right to vote, for instance. We saw this in another federal case, the one of the cases out of Texas, where they explained, they use the same framework of people who are convicted felons being outside of the protections of the people, but had a frankly much better justification, at least for it, which is that historically, even though there aren't gun laws that were in place disarming convicted felons in the founding era, they did have laws that restricted their other rights, like the right to vote.
Right.
So there's certainly a little bit of nuance, but I do think that putting in explicitly that the Second Amendment just is less impactful right than the other rights in the Constitution, it wouldn't go over well at the Supreme Court. However, there's a different reason to think this the Supreme Court probably won't intervene here, which is something that I wrote about for a member's piece this week. And frankly, we just talked about how it is weird, right, that they would lead with an appeal to Supreme Court dicta, stuff that doesn't have binding effect on the rulings in Heller and McDonald and Bruin, when they're supposed to do the historical analysis. That's supposed to be what the merits of this ruling are based on. But instead, they lead with this appeal to, how the Supreme Court has framed the Second Amendment in previous rulings. And I think they did that because it indicates to me, what the Supreme Court has said previously, that they're just not that eager to get involved in litigating felon in possession laws, at least not at an early stage. I think there's so much more they can get into where they're going to find 5 or 6 justices willing to, or who have the same view of particular gun restrictions than when it comes to these felon in possession laws, even for nonviolent felons.
Yeah.
Because, the Third Circuit is certainly correct that the Supreme Court has repeatedly talked about how this only applies to law-abiding citizens or law-abiding, people. And that's while the Supreme Court ought to apply their own Bruin tests faithfully and not be affected by sort of other concerns at play, like the effect of the ruling on enforcement of gun laws in the country and so forth, that in practice, that's not how it always works, right? Like, I think it's, you might be able to, whether you can come up with a historical justification that makes sense for these felon in possession laws, especially as they apply to nonviolent felons, is, I think, an open question that's going to be debated for a while now. But I just don't see the Supreme Court actually jumping on this case. I don't think this is going to be the one that they take next. I think they're far more likely to take, an assault weapons ban case or magazine limits or permit to purchase laws, or there's so many other things. The Second Amendment litigation is really at its infancy to this point, and I just don't know that they're going to be jumping at the opportunity to take this case, at least not until a circuit split develops. And I think they'll be more active generally overall with on-gun cases, but this one in particular is probably not going to be where they go next. What do you think?
I think that's exactly right. I think, to your point, the previous gun decisions where they repeatedly state that nothing in this decision is meant to construe upsetting longstanding rights to keep dangerous people from owning guns, and the Second Amendment only applies to law-abiding citizens. I think that's their way of signaling, hey, we're not looking to upset things like these very bans, like felon in possession bans. And so I just don't see the appetite being there to immediately take a case where that's at least in the air. That's a possibility where the longstanding felon bans are at least potentially being upset. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, same for like the NFA, the National Firearms Act, and machine gun regulations.
Yeah.
They'll probably be hard pressed to find historical analogs for those laws if you do a Bruin analysis. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the Supreme Court is going to jump at the opportunity to actually go through with any of that stuff, to be honest, as much as it might piss off gun rights advocates. I just think there is a practical aspect to all of this. And there is you look at the bump stock case that's been denied twice now,
right,
for Supreme Court review after Bruin. And even though you could approach that case from 2 different angles, right? The EPA ruling would seem to have implications for the bump stock ban, given how it was created through the rulemaking process, using very broad authority from a government agency, the ATF or DOJ. They could easily take that case, but they aren't necessarily going to do that. Right. And this is the thing about the Supreme Court. They get to be very selective in what they actually address. And just because a case seems like it wouldn't withstand scrutiny that the Supreme Court has laid out as required, doesn't mean that the Supreme Court's actually going to jump in and intervene.
Yeah.
And I just think that the practical reality here is, in this situation, they're just unlikely to do it. But we'll keep watching. Perhaps we'll be wrong. You never know.
It's true.
I think this new court is different. You do have someone on the court now who has directly addressed this issue, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who, by the way, did use that same sort of a version of this bigoted gun law argument in her Cantor dissent, although she came to the opposite conclusion that the Third Circuit did, which is that nonviolent felons shouldn't be disarmed for life. And she's the only one, though, of the 9 that have written anything about nonviolent felons or felon in possession laws. So whether or not the rest of the court is as interested in taking on that issue remains to be seen. It could be. We don't know. It's still early days of this new court, really. I mean, it's only been a couple of years since the key players have been added to the lineup there. So we'll have to wait and see. And we will, of course, be covering it all over at thereload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free newsletter that goes out every Friday morning, or buy a membership. Become a member. You get this podcast day early. You get the opportunity to appear on the podcast. We have a member scheduled real soon here to be on the show, so I'm looking forward to that. And you'll get exclusive access to hundreds of pieces of analysis that you won't find anywhere else. And you'll also be supporting the reporting that we do. And if you want to support us, but you don't have the means or ability or desire to buy a membership right now, you can also go ahead and like this episode on YouTube. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. You can give us a rating on your favorite podcasting app that you're listening to this on. Write up a review. All those things help boost our reach, and so we encourage you to do it. That is all for this week. We will try to put together an episode for next week. Obviously it's Thanksgiving, so whether we can get a guest in time will be interesting to see. But if not, we'll be back again the week after that. And that's all we've got for you. Stay tuned.